is Bob Duff. I'm State Senator, represent Norwalk and Darien up in Hartford. We have Lucy Dathan and State Representative Chris Perrone. Lucy represents the 142nd District, which is part of New Canaan, Cranberry, Silvermine, Brookside, West Norwalk. Perfect. And Chris represents East Norwalk, Central Norwalk, and South Norwalk as well. So we're here tonight. We're hopefully Representative Sims will be here as well. We're here from 7:30 to 8:30. There's no real agenda. Just talk a little bit about the legislative session, talk about what we're up to, and answer your questions, obviously. If we hopefully answer your questions, if we can't, we'll try to find the answers for you. There's some information on the music stand there with some of our information, and you're welcome to look at it. So just kind of big picture right now. And by the way, it's Chris Perrone's birthday, so it'd be nice to
It's all right. You can still ask any question. It's fine.
Except for Halloween.
Yeah, that's you're gonna have to FOI that one.
So anyway, so we're probably about a little over a third of the legislative past the legislative session at this point. A number of bills, over 3,000 bills, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 bills have been proposed. Proposed bills are generally concepts or ideas that are usually a couple sentences or so, and they start the conversation as to what people are thinking, ideas that they might have, various things that may come from campaigning, may come from their districts, may come from ideas that they have based on feedback or other policy initiatives that they want to see happen. And this is the year. The way the legislative session works is this is the year where individuals can propose legislation. So they can propose on pretty much any topic they want, saying it whatever they like, and then it's up to the committees of cognizance to determine whether or not it gets a public hearing, whether they get drafted, gets voted out of committee, and then ultimately to the House and Senate. And so, a number of those things obviously are things that people have heard about or talked about already. There's a number of things that most people probably aren't aware of. There's a number of innocuous types of bills that are agency bills that are fixes the ands and the commas and the thes and that kind of stuff. And so right now the committees are at work, hearing the various bills and talking over those kinds of things. Some of them have voted out some bills already. Very few of them have voted out some bills. I was looking at the Senate calendar today, and there are probably about maybe 20 bills, if that many, maybe 15 on the Senate calendar. Most of those are from the Aging Committee, which has a very early deadline, and they voted out most of their bills. So that's kind of where we are right now. There's also the issue, the other thing is the budget. The governor presented his budget on February 15th. 20th, I'm sorry. Now the Appropriations and Finance Committees get to work on hearing from the public on those. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. So now on the budget.
Those are being
on the budget that the governor proposed on February the 20th, my apologies. The Appropriations and Finance Committees go to work, hearing from the public based on the governor's proposed budget, and then the legislature presents their own budget and then negotiates with the executive branch to come up with a final budget. We adjourn at some point in June 6th, I think it is, for the year. Most state legislatures are part-time legislatures, so we're done in June. That's the idea. With the budget, with bills, if bills are not voted on, if bills are not, say the Senate votes on it, but not the House votes on it, next year they have to start all over again. So it doesn't continue like Congress does for over 2 years. It stops and start all over again. And then next year, legislators actually cannot introduce their own legislation. Only committees can introduce legislation unless it has a fiscal note to it. So that's kind of the process where we are right now. Like I said, we're about a third of the way through. Right now, I think Lucy has a sheet or had sheets that talk about 22 steps on how a bill becomes a law.
Schoolhouse Rock video.
Somewhere around step 6 or 7 or something like that at this point. So anyway, so that's where we are, and I think Chris and Lucy can take it from here.
So I'm Lucy Dathan. I've met a lot of people in the room. It's really nice to see so many people engaged. I really feel like our democracy works best when we all have our say and we let our voices known. As I said, I can't represent you properly in Hartford unless I know what's important to you, and I'm so happy to see so much civic engagement, so thank you. I'm representing, as Bob said, the 142nd District, which covers part of New Canaan and the towns in Norwalk. And I'm just having this is my freshman year, and so I'm learning a lot. It's like drinking from a fire hose. And I'm really enjoying the people I'm working with. I'm sitting on 3 committees. I'm vice chair of insurance and real estate. I'm sitting on human services and appropriations. Appropriations has been super busy. I couldn't even imagine how busy it was, but it's been every day for the last 2 weeks. And I'm sitting on it with Chris, so it's nice to have another Norwalker in the room. So I'm gonna let Chris talk about what he's doing, but thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for, first of all, Travis Sims, Representative Sims is here also. I just want to say that Lucy's doing a great job. I think that, putting it mildly, that appropriations is learning by taking a sip from a hot fire hose, because it's basically, you're overseeing the entire state budget, so you're weighing in on nearly every facet of it. And Representative Sims is also on approach with me, and he's doing a fine job. They're basically, it's baptism by fire. It's all that. My area, I'm on between subcommittees and regular committees. I'm on basically 8 committees, and it's a little crazy, but the reason for that is I'm primarily overseeing transportation funding, and really what the state is looking to do in that area. So obviously tolls gets mentioned a lot, but the bigger what drives the toll debate is the state of our finances vis-a-vis our transportation infrastructure, where our transportation infrastructure is going, where we want to be in 30 years, how we're going to use our infrastructure to essentially maintain our competitiveness vis-a-vis other states, and to make sure that we are developing our communities, connecting our communities in effective and efficient ways through transit-oriented development, through interstate rail, light rail, as well as steel, concrete, roads, bridges, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the overview. I also sit on the Energy and Technology Committee, and obviously that's an important committee for us as well. I try to keep our rates down, and that's pretty much it. I don't want to take too much time talking about committee stuff because I know a lot of you have questions. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Sims, so he has to say a few words, introduce himself, and
Hello,
then we can
everyone.
open it up.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. I'm Representative Travis Sims. Thank you all for coming out tonight. As Representative Perone mentioned, I sit on the Appropriations Committee with him, along with, I believe we've got probably another 15, 20 reps, between reps and senators that sit on this committee. I'm also Vice Chair of Transportation, and that's something that we'll be going and talking about a little later on. And third, I also sit on the Environment Committee, which is very important to many of you here in the room. So we'll also be having discussions about that as well. And I'll turn this back over so we won't delay any time. But I represent the 140th District in Norwalk. I'm not sure if anyone here is from the 140th, but we certainly we have our own issues as the city does as well. And we certainly look forward to working together in a collaborative effort, making sure that we are taking care of all those issues that are important to each and every one of us. So again, thank you again for coming out tonight.
Okay. All right. Let's open it up for questions.
So the proposed Senate Bill 475 would increase the sales tax by 0.5%. Nancy Chapman reported on this, and it would direct the revenue to the municipality where the sale occurs, except in the case of malls, where it would be split 60-40 with contiguous municipalities. So my question is, yes or no, do you support that?
Bill itself? I've always supported sales tax sharing of the current sales tax, and we had that actually over a few years ago with Senate Bill 1 that we've done, by supporting a piece that actually brought about $2 million a year to Norwalk to help with that. So I've always been more of a fan of keeping the existing sales tax, but sending some of that back to cities and towns. As far as excluding malls, I think that would be detrimental to Norwalk, especially as we open the Sono collection in October, and that's supposed to bring potentially $5 million of tax revenue to the state. If we were to do that, I would want to make sure that malls were not exempt.
So do you support this?
I haven't read the bill, but that bill, I think that's Senator Williams' bill?
Yes.
Well, I just articulated my position. I'd rather keep the sales tax within what we have and share it as we have tried to do, and bring a piece of that back to our cities and towns.
So you'd like to get Norwalk a bigger share of the existing
Correct.
sales tax?
And we had
You
that,
bet.
Senate Bill 1. Some of that got reduced because of the bipartisan budget that we did over the last 2 years. We were trying to balance the budget in compromises with my friends on the other side of the aisle who never were a big fan of that concept. Some of that money got swept and put back into the general fund rather than going back to municipalities.
Gotcha. So getting a larger share of that.
We should let other people ask
Okay.
questions too, because we have a lot of people
Sure.
who.
We can come back though.
Thank you.
if we-
We can also talk to you after.
Okay.
Hi, I represent the individuals living in our community in Fairfield County with disabilities who are relying on Medicaid, Medicare. We have 3 bills right now we're working on. Senator Duff, I wanted to thank you for your support for the Bill 463. The bill passed through both the chambers, and then I guess it timed out, and it needs to be it was renamed and looked at again because they failed to develop the task force or the task committee.
Could you just give everybody sort of one line, like what the bill does, so they?
Sure, this particular bill, I can read you a definition of that one. We're working on 3 levels. We want to be able to take a look at behavioral challenges for individuals and whether or not we have appropriate supports in place or approval from the Medicaid, Medicare for us to access the services we need. So it's not only that you get your waiver to be able to help them to live and become productive members of our community, but they're telling us what we can and what we can't use the money for. So we're wanting a task force to re-examine with all the new research that's been done for autism and intellectual disabilities and Down syndrome, what are the behavioral and more the mental health supportive needs.
This is a very simple bill, but important.
Yes, and so thank you for your support. It does we need to keep
Yeah.
going so it doesn't fall through the cracks. We do have
The issue, let me just for the audience say, the issue was, we passed the task force, it was signed into law by former Governor Malloy. People who had appointing authority, because there have been a lot of task forces over the last few years, did not appoint the people to the task force. I did, but I appointed Cynthia Stramaniti from over Cranberry, but she was one of the few people appointed. So we needed to kind of redo it again. Because these task forces generally have statutory deadlines to report by January 1st or something like that. So that wasn't done. So
The
yes.
second bill, and I wanted to thank you, Lucy, because you are on as a co-sponsor for these bills, and we so appreciate your support. And we would really encourage representatives to also join Lucy and co-sign and co-sponsor these, because the more people we have as co-sponsors, the more strength we have to try to get them through. So in brief, the second one that we have is looking at what we call the level of need assessment. Assessments have not been revised to determine how much support financially and otherwise individuals can have in a very long time. And what they're using as their criterion is really behind the times. We have a new measure that's been accepted for adults, and that's called the DSM-5, and the state of Connecticut is not in sync with that from Medicaid and Medicare. So what's happening is individuals are not getting qualified where they need to. And I think 17,000 individuals in the Connecticut DDS, the Fairfield DDS, they fall in the most highest level of need. And so they're not individuals who are going to be able to learn how to go out and get a job and get paid and live on their own. They're going to need us. That's a big number. And so we should be assessing their needs properly and appropriately. And so thank you for your sponsorship, and we encourage others to look at that. And the third, we have 372, bill is 372 for the LON score assessment. And then the third one is a simple one but important. It's looking to ask for a stipend for people who care for their adult children. There is one for elderly. For if you have an aging parent, families can sometimes get a stipend if they don't have their own financial wherewithal and want to basically help the state out by being the caregiver. And many families are willing to do that for their individuals with disabilities, their adult children as they age, and don't have the financial support to do that. So that's a third one.
It's a familiar concept. Has that come up in the past? The concept sounds familiar.
Well, the bill is 393, and it's been we've been working on it for a little while now. But the concept for caregivers for elderly is the one that has already been approved. So I think we're just trying to piggyback on that and say, can we open it up and include, all family individual members who qualify for those who, will not be able to care for themselves. Because what happens is the system gets overtaxed with more of a institutionalized approach. It's not good for anyone, especially the individuals who are there. So
I see it as a fiscally responsible thing to do because we're actually alleviating state resources, which are a lot more expensive than we would be paying for.
And many of us are beginning to turn to that. I self-direct the care for my adult daughter. But we have just begun that process, and that has a long way to go. But we're getting there. There's a shift in the mindset to say, if you would like to, we'll look at that. But it's mostly out of pocket right now. So it's a good way for us to start with these bills, and then who knows, maybe we can just keep going with it. So thank you. I open my home to any of you who want to come and experience what level of need 7, 8 is like for the individuals, and what the homes are like, and what the family support system is like.
I would suggest two things I just want to mention is.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes, sorry. Two things I would suggest. One is, does DDS have a position yet on these bills at all? Have they weighed in at all? Okay. Are they supportive, not supportive?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, they are.
They are
Okay.
supportive.
Oh, good. Okay.
So we're there.
Okay, good.
Families First is there.
Yep.
Rotary there. We're
That's helpful.
rallying.
Okay.
But
So
folks like me, I work
Yep.
my job, and then I work my self-directing employer
Right.
thing for my daughter, which it's crazy that people work and everything. So to get up to Hartford is just so hard. So we don't have much of a voice.
No, you have a- you got-
Yeah, I am working with Families First. I really have appreciated their reach out to me, and that's how I became much more aware of these
Yes.
bills. Just so people are aware, the level of need is given to children from a young age, and it kind of is reassessed. But 8 is the most severe, from my understanding.
Yes.
And it's not a large number of people. It's really kind of, it is almost fits in a bell curve how it is. People are in the center as well. And that's where most of it, but we need to make sure that these people are taken care of. And who better to take care of them, in my opinion, than a loving family member.
So the other suggestion I have is what's been always helpful to me is when groups of Family First groups do those, invite legislators to people's homes, like the Sunday afternoon meetings or Saturday afternoon meeting, whatever they are, because they really do help to speak to people in their districts and help educate us as legislators on some of the struggles families are having. So we have a lot of new legislators this year. 14 out of 36 in the Senate are brand new. A lot of new House members. So those kinds of ways in which to educate legislators are very important.
Sure. Thank you very much. We'd love to have you come. My home
for your advocacy.
is available.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, I probably have two questions. The first, hopefully we can quickly cover. Number one is about the three bills on school regionalization, SB 738, SB 457, SB 874, which we have a very large turnout of a public hearing on March 1st. And on that hearing, something very significant happened at about a little before 6 o'clock, after hundreds of people, maybe about more than 100 people, came testify strongly against that. The chairman, Education Committee Chairman, Senator Doug McCrowley, finally broke into a very surprising speech of the elephant in the room speech. And also he mentioned the Brown versus Board Education case of 1954, and pointing out that in Connecticut, what he perceived as the permanent or continuing racial segregation in education, and perhaps beyond. So essentially, implicitly equating the people who live in these towns with certain zip codes to racist or racist, at least racist racial segregationists, right? And that kind of throw a bomb to the whole. Basically, from that on, people from both sides realize the truth behind those three bills. It's not about cost saving or more efficient school district and so on. It's really about the elephant in the room, which in turn, personally, I believe that's not the accurate. It's not accurate to call it racial segregation, desegregation. It's the essence is really more about the socioeconomic divide and what I would say really class warfare. Because I live in those towns, and I didn't participate in the racial segregation, back in the 60s. I wasn't even born. I didn't come to this. I didn't move to the town a few years ago, right? So just by moving there, I'm guilty by association. I'm essentially lumped into that category of white privilege, even though I'm not even white. And I don't feel that privilege because we work so hard every day to pay our mortgage and so on. But this thinking, this ideology really alarmed people and basically put those two camps even further apart, more rapidly into a rapid escalation of this almost civil war-like. So that's very bad. My heart is very heavy because people start to do that. It's very risky. It's very hard to resist the temptation to hate. And now it becomes to hate people, right? I think the real enemy is not about people who have ideology, even the ideology we're against. It's really that kind of hatred among men that has very complex origin and very complex history of evolution as well. But if people couldn't get back to the bigger picture, right? Even after this fight, at the end of this so-called civil war, class warfare, there's got to be a higher wisdom and vision, which is the reconciliation, reconstruction, right? Both sides, from towns, people need to know that, see through the eyes of chairman. Maybe he has childhood of, living through the suffocating, humiliating poverty. And then as a school teacher, he saw the same focus in students, right? I totally identify with that. And I actually gave up my right to speak strongly against that. I reached out to him for the conversation. He shut me down, basically, didn't ask questions, unfortunately, because of my, But anyway, I see that we have the higher vision, but in the meantime, it become even more valuable for the townspeople to fight, because now the truth came out. It's not about cost saving, it's about class warfare. And I do not agree with the chairman's will that, he has the right to take away he came from that background, humiliating, and he wants to do justice for his people, poor people, but should not apply deception and coercion on these bills to take away the rights earned by those people in the small town. They're middle class people, right? They are not poor, but they also have that human rights. They also have that civil rights, because we have the shared humanity here. It's not like you can rob them and give it to the poor and achieve your mission, because the means was not wide. The means and ends must be one. If you use the wrong means, which I don't want to call it evil means, but I think it's very close to,
Jack,
you should not.
let other people.
Should not. Then you destroy your ends. In the end, you will not achieve justice for the poor people either. But I'm afraid he's going that road, and I don't know. Your bill is really in the same of the three. I can see the same, trouble there. Yeah. But I don't want you to speak at personal level. Gentlemen, what made you so adamant to push this bill for something?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I appreciate your comments. I would say. What's that? Oh, okay. Okay, all right, so the microphones
The
are.
microphones are for the.
So for the
they're
three.
not- They're not for audio.
I'll be very happy to mention all three bills. So there's one bill proposed by Senator Looney, which is basically a study bill, and it says that we shall study regionalization of school districts, and as he describes it, for administration, back end, back office, sharing superintendents, that kind of stuff. And it basically says we're going to charge a committee, and if the committee can't decide on how to do it, it'll potentially default to probate districts, because that is the only successful way in which the state has ever regionalized anything. Went from like 170-something probate districts, or whatever the number is, down to 80, or whatever that number is, probate districts we have now, and it's been the only successful time we've ever successfully regionalized or consolidated anything in the state of Connecticut, which is why I think he did the regionalization. So that's basically, from what I understand, that's basically what it says. Second bill is my bill, which says that if you have a school district with fewer than 2,000 students, which is, by the way, half of the school districts in the state, 32 of them, or 39, have fewer than 100 students, which, by the way, have a principal and then a superintendent over the principal, which is, really doesn't sound very efficient to me. Basically, the bill says that you have to consolidate or look for regional cooperation with another school district, and if you can't do that, you have to tell the Department of Education why you can't do that. And that number 2,000 was very specifically chosen, and I've said this publicly many times, very specifically chosen because half of our school districts have fewer than 2,000 students. On top of it, if you look at the research says that small districts, and around 2,000, are the districts that are not as efficient, nor do they produce the desired student outcomes as larger districts. Nobody can decide on how big a district should be, but as far as how small it should not be smaller than about 2,000, maybe 2,500 students. But I am at 2,000, and I have said publicly, and I've committed to this, I would not raise that number at all. The third bill is the governor's bill that looks at, it's much more comprehensive. It looks at busing, it looks at busing contracts. It looks at back office stuff like printing and probably IT. It probably looks at accounts payable. It looks at a bunch of things. It says, can these things come together? Much more. When the governor proposes bills, it's much later during the legislative session, so it's much more comprehensive. So that's what he's proposed. And those three bills are getting the hearings right now. And so those are the three bills. Everybody understand that? Okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So back to your point, sir. Everybody wants what's best for their kids, right? I do. You do. We all want what's best for our kids. We want to help educate them in the best way.
And beyond the liberty of people's right to self-determination.
Right. Let me just finish my thoughts because I listened to you. So we all want what's best for our kids, and we're going to do what's best. So you move to your community, maybe thinking that school system's great. I live in Norwalk, thinking, Norwalk is great, and I love the city here. I grew up here, 5th generation. And so I wasn't at the hearing. I can't speak for what Senator McCrory said. However, I will tell you this, for maybe what he said. Because of the fact that you may feel a certain way in your heart, and I'm not casting aspersions on anybody who said anything, because I don't know what's in there here. All I can tell you is that some of the emails I've received from people would probably be in direct conflict to what you just said here. From a standpoint of the words and the innuendos and other types of things that people have said about regionalization and forced busing and other types of things that frankly have been probably less than what we want to say on this topic, because it's not, none of this has been about closing schools, none of this has been about forced busing, none of this has been about taking away power from the boards of education, none of this has been about losing local control, any of that stuff. This is about making structural change to say we have all these school districts. I'll just speak on my bill. we have all these tiny school districts. I mean, people talk about the Amity School District. Okay, that's a regional school district, but that has K through 7 in 3 towns, right? Was it Bethany, Woodbridge, and Orange? 3 superintendents, K through 7, boom, 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 boom. Then the kids go through to high school, to the regional high school. They got another superintendent. So they got 4 superintendents for 3 towns. So I look at that and go, is that the most efficient use of our dollars? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But at least we ought to be having a conversation about that. Because we send a lot of money for education cost sharing to a lot of these towns, especially in Northwest Connecticut and Eastern Connecticut, that have lost student population. We continue to send millions and millions of dollars to these school districts. And on top of that, I'm not certain that the kids are getting the desired outcomes that they need. A lot of the schools, I talked to one of my colleagues in Eastern Connecticut, who happens also to be the first select person, and she's like, well, we don't have after-school programs for the kids. We don't have, some of them don't have music and arts programs. Things that around here we
Take for granted.
we would be out of our skin if the kids didn't have these things. And so, can we provide better opportunities and better outcomes for these kids, and at the same time making structural changes that save us dollars and put that money back into the classroom. And last point on that. Towns like New Canaan, and Darien, and Wilton, and Westport, and Weston have taken it on the chin the last few years on education funding from the state, because they're the ones getting cut. But at the same time, a lot of these districts in Northwest Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut, or the districts that have fewer kids are still getting the same money. Now the formula has changed, so that is about to change anyway, but not fast enough. But that's taking away dollars from your communities as well. I mean, it's no secret. Westport, Wilton, Canaan, Norwalk, Sanford, send a lot of money into Hartford. We should be getting as much money as we can, because at least in Norwalk, we have a population that's increasing. And Wilton, I'm not sure, I'm assuming that's where you live, or New Canaan, is been cut on their ECS funding. And I'd rather see that money go back towards your district rather than go towards a school district that has 100 kids with a principal and a superintendent on top of it.
Okay, thanks very much. I think my second question was briefly about, because first of
Should
all,
we do
before
one
the-
question
Yeah, I
per
think we have to
person?
share the wealth a little.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but
Okay, I intended to ask this, HB 7319.
can we talk maybe afterwards?
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure we get
Also,
to
I'm
everybody.
a little worried that you have a huge disconnect with your constituents, even in Norwalk, because you told me that elephant in the room. That elephant in the room, that's Mr. Crowley, Senator Crowley was talking about. It's a total different layer that you didn't cover, unfortunately. But later we can talk about that.
So
Huge,
I-
9,000 people now in.
No. People have misinterpreted the bill, and they've made their own interpretations of it, but I've been very clear. Written op-eds, I've talked about it, I've answered every email on it, so for somebody to say, I've answered emails from people not even my district on the issue. So for somebody to say to me that I have misrepresented or I
No,
haven't
you
explained
missed
it
the
correctly,
chairman's
I can't talk
speech.
about the chairman, but, you know, Senator McCrory cares very deeply about education, make sure all kids succeed. And I'll tell you what, in our cities, we can no longer allow, if we're gonna grow our tax base in the state of Connecticut, we cannot have 40% of our kids in our urban areas, who tend to be mostly minority and poor, leave high school without better outcomes. So we gotta figure out how to get better outcomes for them.
Right, that's.
And so I think we probably all share that goal, right? But we don't have so much money to put around. So we'd all like to say, fine, just put more money into these districts. That'd be great. We only have so many, we have finite resources. So how do we do that? This is why we have these conversations about that, okay? But we all share the same goal. We all want what's best for our kids. We all want them to succeed. We want to grow our tax base. We want to make sure the kids who are in our urban districts especially have the opportunities when they get out of college and they're prepared for college and career.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So, first of all, in terms of looking at benchmarks for where we can get better educational outcomes for the same amount of money or less, Massachusetts is a really good example of where you can get better educational outcomes for less money. So where I think, Senator Duff, we have commonality in our viewpoints on regionalization or school spending is that there is a lot of inefficiencies. There's no doubt. Where I think I probably differ from your viewpoint is the focus on what the underlying roots are of inefficient spending. In my mind, from what I've studied, a lot of those cost inefficiencies are focused on unfunded state mandates, prevailing wages, binding arbitration, and minimum budget requirements. So if we're going to have a conversation about inefficiencies, why don't we focus on those, even though I recognize that, you know, some constituents like unions might be, feel slightly vulnerable when we have that type of conversation. But if we're going to have a transparent conversation, why can't we talk about the real cost center, which is those 4 things? And then I have a question for all of you. You know, there's a lot of bills this legislative session that are punitive, either to everyone or pitting kind of towns against cities, which I think is just an awful way to operate a state. It just breeds hostility and out-migration. So if we're going to have bills that have to do with statewide car taxes or statewide property taxes or pension transfers, I think it's not a bill this year, but there's been talked about an equalized state mill rate, which would really hurt some towns and benefit other cities. To me, let's try to come up with legislation where we lower the cost burden for every resident. We're not pitting one constituency versus another. So the question for all of you is, what bills have you introduced this session or plan to introduce in subsequent sessions that you think are going to lower the cost burden for every resident and not pit one constituency versus another?
I got to think about that for a second.
I was going to say.
I would just say that, again, we're looking at, you know, I have to think about all the different bills I've introduced and probably get back to you on some of that. But I would say that I think your point's well taken from a standpoint of what do we do to try and make sure we are making some reforms. So let's look at what we've done in the state the last few years. So here's what we've done. We have cut billions of dollars from our state spending. We have made 2 agreements with state employees that are saving $41 billion over 20 years. We have reduced our state employee workforce by 16%, which is the lowest per capita since the late 1960s. And we have the highest private sector employment since the late 1990s. Now, so we have made some major change, and we paid our pensions for the last 8 years on an actuarial basis for the first time ever. So we think about what's causing some of the issues with the state from the standpoint of deficits, what people hear, and problems long term. A lot of that is from the fact of not paying into our pensions for many, many years, especially our Tier 1 employees, which ended in 1984, our teachers' retirement pension, which is made a good bond covenant in 2006, got wiped out in 2008, but we need to fix that as well. So from a state government standpoint, we have made some major changes. I think now we may disagree on that, but I think we've made some major changes in state government. One area we have not really touched has been out of our $20 billion budget. And by the way, we have tier 4 state employees now, which have a hybrid pension, 401k plan, paying more to health care and their state pensions and everything else than any other time. But out of our $20 billion budget, $5 billion of it goes towards municipalities. So you look at ways in which we can say, okay, what can we do to reduce costs for residents at the same time delivering better services? So we all know we want to make, we all want to make DMV more efficient. We all agree on that, right? 'Cause my license is expiring in 2 months, and I'm dreading going to the DMV to get my license renewed.
You can book an appointment online.
I will do that, actually. But we want to make that, we do want to make that more efficient, obviously. We want to get back our center that we had, like our photo center we had in Norwalk before. We will get that. But so we have to then look at what are we doing with our municipalities to make them more efficient. How can we do that? So we look at some of the cost centers that we have, such as in our state, which is 169 municipalities for 3.5 million people, and some would argue over 200, I've seen different numbers, but over 200 school districts, or multiple health departments, or other types of bureaucracies. I just learned today that California has, for the whole state of California, 4 police dispatch centers. 4. You know how many we have in Connecticut? 129. So,
My example is 911 call centers. And
Right.
the whole city of London, there's 20 million people. I lived there for almost a third of my life. And it's 999 there, not 911, but one call center that handles emergency services, and there is a backup. And the government's been looking at trying to consolidate it even more and make one for the whole country. So it's something that is technologically possible, and it would save a lot of money.
Actually, I brought that up during our bipartisan budget a couple of years ago, and I got the, oh no, we tried in our town, but it's much cheaper if we just do it in our little 2 towns of 20,000 people. That's baloney. So people just don't want to give it up. So we've got to figure out ways in which we can incent those kind of changes and not have the state pay for those things. Because all those kinds of things end up costing all of us as taxpayers. We put it on, especially for construction stuff, that goes on our credit card, that goes as bonding. So those are ways in which, now look, we can talk about some other mandates and fine, we want to have those conversations, open that all up, open them all up. But then everybody's got to give a little bit. You know, everybody's got to give a little bit, because I'll tell you what, you have our urban centers surrounded by the suburban areas, and the urban centers are the ones who carry all the social costs, or at least 90% of them. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We do. And so let's have that conversation then. If you want to have that conversation, let's have that conversation, because the city of Norwalk carries a lot of the social costs for the surrounding suburbs, and so does the city of Stamford. And you got a city like New Britain, where 50% of its town is not taxed because they have hospitals, nonprofits, college, all those kinds of things. So, and the towns around them don't have that. So let's have that conversation.
I think one of the interesting things that I'm really liking working with the governor is he's a very open person. I mean, you know, I've met with him on several occasions. He's very thoughtful. He's looking at all different things. He's open to suggestions. And, you know, I've been talking to him about ways that, you know, we need to have this negotiation and we need to address some of the things that you've talked about. And that might be one of those levers that we pull in order to make an adjustment. I think we need to look at the whole picture, not just individual things, and look at individual towns and say what an individual town is doing or not doing. So, but I would, for me, what bills have I put out there? I think one of the things that I think will help a lot of towns and a lot of people all over the state is I've asked for an elimination of business entity tax. It's $250 that's asking every small business around the state, whether you're a mop and pop shop here in Norwalk or you are a large corporation, electric boat, everyone has to pay it, $250. I think it's regressive and it's also not business friendly. So that's something I think equally across the board. It's going to encourage entrepreneurialism, hopefully, and I'm also hoping that it will reach everybody around the state.
Chris?
Yeah, this is so trite, I apologize, but tolls. I just...
Nothing trite about tolls.
I let our transportation go. I know, and we've got Travis and Chris on transportation, and honestly, just tell me, I'm like a rabid Democrat, okay? So I just want to know, what is the Democratic thinking in the Assembly about tolls? I know it's a complex issue, but especially Chris and Travis, who you would speak to it.
Well, the problem is this: we're getting to a point where we're starting to get past the political aspects of this. We're getting into basically what the math is telling us. We have a special transportation fund that's going to be insolvent in 2 years. Okay, the special transportation fund was put together when we had the horrible crash up in Stratford in the mid '80s and the Miami River Bridge collapse. So the thinking was to create a transportation fund funded primarily by the gas tax and other taxes. Now over time, that has since been running down. The fuel efficiency of vehicles is definitely increased. I'm part of that. I drive a plug-in hybrid, so it's partly my fault. The fact is, the question is how do we develop a sustainable revenue stream going forward to not only keep our roads and our bridges into a state of good repair, but also how do we plan for the future? When you look at Virginia, where they have a 30-year plan for how they're doing their infrastructure, their transportation, transit-oriented development, factoring in light rail, doing all these things, creating walkable communities where people want to move to, where companies want to move to. How do we create that? How do we get on that page? And that requires not only planning and a DOT and a governor with that's looking down the road, but also a revenue source, a revenue stream that can sustain that. So, to me, the lack of funds currently in our special transportation fund is driving the toll conversation now, but we also need to be looking at the larger conversation about, what kind of state we want to be, how does infrastructure tie all that together? Because if we do that, if we get that right, we're going to be in good shape. But this conversation now is a tough conversation to have, because we're talking about how tolls impact people's lives in real time, how the state's going to address and not how do you do that? What kind of impact are tolls going to have on folks? So there's a lot. This is still being all worked out.
Well, on that, what about? I thought it was originally going to start out as the interstate truckers. Would that?
There's two proposals on.
So I mean, can you start with small steps?
What happened was,
and how much of that?
It would get us.
Here's
the
big part of that, or not?
To use a word that my son has sometimes used. Here's the dealio with that. Look, the trucks would get us about 30% of the way there in terms of funding our special transportation fund to get us, so we can do not only. Well, I would just say to just get Connecticut into a state of good repair. We have 242 functionally challenged, deficient bridges that need to be addressed now, it's really we have to basically factor that in, that the trucks, just taxing the trucks passing through the state of Connecticut would only get us 30% of the way there. So we still have 70% that we have to work out the funding to.
Your other side of the aisle, would they go with that? 30% better than nothing.
It's.
Or is this all or one?
Well, the other side of the aisle is talking about issuing geo bonds, which we can go do a sidebar on that if you want. But the fact of the matter is, last year we put out, I think it was $800 million in special tax obligation bonds, which are paid for by taxes in the state of Connecticut, and we had this is for transportation, and we had it was a challenge just moving that. The main reason for that is because our special transportation fund is looking at insolvency. Just the threat of insolvency is making Wall Street say, you know what, we want to make sure that there's going to be revenue going into this fund. Now, in the last election, there was a referendum on the lockbox. The citizens of Connecticut passed a referendum creating a lockbox, so as part of the special transportation fund. So any money raised going forward, if they're dedicated revenue, would go into it. It'd be protected by this lockbox legislation. I know you're going. I know you're doing the Saturday Night Live thing in your head. I know.
Can I just throw something in here, because it's there's a thing out there that says we have raided the transportation fund. It's a bunch of baloney. We have gas tax, the wholesale tax, and part of the sales tax goes towards transportation. There's, as Chris said, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of needed, about over $100 billion worth of plans just to get us to a state of good repair. So we have put more money in transportation than ever before. And because of the fact, as Chris rightly says, the gas tax revenue is going down, or it's flat, that creates a set of
there's
issues.
another dynamic.
I just want to set the record straight on we're not raiding the fund.
But there's another dynamic at work here, which is that the more the special transportation fund drops, and part of the reason why it's dropping is because the debt service on the loans that the bonds we've floated in the past, those are paid for out of the special transportation fund as well. So you have that combined with the depleting revenues from gas tax. But now what's happening is, but we still have to fix our roads, we still have to fix our bridges. So we're moving money from the general fund into the special transportation fund, and that's impacting schools, it's impacting healthcare, it's impacting care for veterans, it's hitting a lot of areas. So by stabilizing the special transportation fund, to me, is a very important thing. That's why we're so fixated on it. I see it.
And just to add that before we move on, I just want to say that I personally haven't really formed an opinion on whether or not we should be moving in that direction or not. But having said that, if it's a must that we must raise taxes by putting in the tolls, et cetera, I will be in favor of maybe having them in the lockbox, as he alluded to, but make sure that funding in the lockbox in those municipalities, that funding goes to those municipalities instead of back into the general fund for the state. Go to those municipalities to help pay down property taxes to those taxpayers in that community, in that municipality.
I saw a hand over there. Hi.
And by the way, let's do a rapid response here, because we have 5 minutes to go.
I can talk fast.
Yeah.
Fine. If we're getting paid $190 million not to have tolls, why don't you just raise the sales tax by 1/4%? Get the money there and keep the $190 million that you get from the federal government for not having tolls. Honestly, you just gave away $190 million. So we have the czar of transportation and we have the chair, I guess, co-chair. But, you know, there's a monthly Walkbridge meeting. I've never seen either one of you there. It's the largest expenditure we're gonna have to pay in the next 6 years. I can't get a single answer out of them. I mean, you say you have 5,000 bills you're evaluating. Okay, that means you have 15 minutes per bill till June 1st. And we have bills like this one here that's absolutely necessary. There are people here who are beyond suffering. I have a friend. She lost her apartment on August 28th. She's blind, okay? She just got her Section 8 back in February. They put her stuff on the street, okay? She called me, my son went to college. I said, live in my son's room as long as you need. The fact is, her bill can't wait. There are bills that can't wait. We have 5,000 people arguing about 90% crap that's meaningless. Won't help Connecticut at all. And it's a desperate time, honestly. To tell me, you know,
So
we're
I
all
will
freshmen.
implore you to look at that bill. Can you just see yours real quick?
I mean, it's a nightmare,
Please
DCF.
look.
DCF is a nightmare.
So
I don't need
here we
this.
had 5,000 bills.
I don't need this.
They're
get
getting,
it.
it's like looking into a funnel. And
Don't
we're
tell
getting to
me.
the stage, in the next 2 weeks, we're probably gonna have less than
let's
1,000
move
left.
on.
I realize that because I read
Thank you,
plenty of
John.
them that are completely worthless.
Todd?
I just said, as you know, I'm very concerned with historic preservation in Connecticut, and there are 3 bills that I'm just going to mention that really affect it. As you know, I know Chris and Bob have been big supporters of historic preservation in the past, and as you know, you'll see me at the various public hearings, and along with my colleagues in the Connecticut Preservation Action organization. The first one is SB 872, which brings CIA, the Community Investment Act, not the one you think,
Thanks for that.
back onto the budget. The Community Investment Act, for those who don't know, it is funded, it is a pot of money that is funded by real estate recording fees. And those fees go into a fund that is distributed between the dairy industry, farmland preservation, open space preservation, affordable housing, and historic preservation. So it's a land use fee that is directed
By the way,
specifically.
Norwalk, pretty much every community
The
that's
land
represented
use.
here,
Every
all
single-
received grants from the Community
Right.
Investment Act. So whether it's planning grants, whether it's exhibit things, you know, most of the communities that normally don't receive a lot of state money, who receive grants from the
Every
Community
single
Investment Act.
community in Connecticut.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so
Benefits.
agricultural also gets
Right.
part of this.
Benefits at various different levels. Anyway, to make this as quick as possible, I just thought it would be
Yeah.
useful to explain it. To make it as quick as possible, right now that bill, that fund is threatened. The governor wants to bring it into the general fund, and we all know what happens after that. You'll
Well,
never see it
it
again.
wasn't designed that way. It was
Yeah.
designed as a separate, non-lapsing account that was on the side here. So I think the legislature's always been very cognizant of that, and I think we'll continue to be very cognizant of that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that because we're panicking a little bit.
And
You're
Todd,
right.
following our conversation, Todd, I've actually have talked to a lot of people on appropriations,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of people who are concerned. And I've been asking this week, I've been conservation and development meetings on Monday, and I asked each of the department heads that came in, what do you personally think about this? Because I wanted it on the record for them to say how they feel, because I think it's super important that we keep these funds out of the general fund as well. So thank you for
We're
that
on
comment.
And then the only other one, very quickly, is the tax credits. And the way that this is section 43 of SB 877.
So those are all, both CIA and the tax credits all roll into the budget at some point. So those will be budget bills. That'll be part of the budget bill
Right.
eventually.
It's a limitation on,
Yeah.
to effectively kill the historic preservation tax credit.
Yeah. Okay, last question, Diane?
Oh, thank you. Hi, Diane Cece, East Norwalk Neighborhood Association. Thank you all for coming tonight, and happy birthday to Chris as well. This format actually reminds me of the annual League of Women Voters Pie in Politics format, and which actually that got canceled due to weather, I guess. But it's a nice forum because all the state legislators that represent Norwalk are there, but we certainly appreciate your group coming. On the toll issue and projects issues, and I'm glad appropriations and transportation are represented here. And speaking of pie in politics, every year it was there. Every year I asked both Chris and Bob if you're in favor of tolls, and the answer was always no, basically. So now here we are with tolls.
Well, hold on. I mean, because it was always in the context of I couldn't dream of a situation where I'd support tolls where the money would go into not a protected account. I thought that was just dangerous. I thought that the money would disappear.
And that's good, to be fair. And I think if people were always talking about having it in a lockbox, if that were the case. And I raised a question, as you guys know, because I was always a proponent of tolls. Having said that, I think the other end that I haven't heard at all tonight is not just a matter of how we're going to generate revenue for all of these state DOT and transportation projects, is also cost cutting. And are we really looking at how we're spending the money? In East Norwalk alone, which is like the epicenter of maybe disasters going on with DOT projects and how it's going to disrupt our lives, we have 3 to 5 projects right now that the residents in East Norwalk question the validity of if they're valid at all and why we should be spending the money on them. Not the least of which is the walk bridge, which that other gentleman just brought up. But there's also the Strawberry Hill Avenue Bridge project, which is tens of millions of dollars, essentially being done because the truckers can't help but hitting the abutment because they don't stay in their lanes. So why are we being burdened as taxpayers with those types of projects? Also the East Avenue project and others. So I would say to the 4 of you, not just to be addressing the issues of how you're going to raise revenue, but what are we looking at in terms of the DOT projects, and in particular, I think we have a window of opportunity now because there is a new commissioner. And I'd like to see an opportunity to have this commissioner and the committees sit down and literally go through the entire list of projects. And I bet you may be able to find billions if just little Norwalk has that amount of stuff going on that people are questioning if we need it. Then across the state, there's probably a lot more. So if you could at least address that, I'd appreciate it.
I think transportation is one of the 3 legs of the stool that helps us to grow our tax base in the state. We have to deal with transportation and transportation improvements. I support fixing the Strawberry Hill Avenue Bridge. I mean, granted, it's going to be an inconvenience. I drive that road almost every day, but that has to be fixed, just like the Yankee Doodle Bridge has to be fixed. I support widening East Avenue to 4 lanes because I grew up in East Norwalk. I know what it's like there in the summertime to drive down that road and not move, especially as more residents move into the area. And you can't attract businesses if you've got the same old infrastructure that you've always had. So I support the improvements to the East Norwalk train station. I've discussed at length my position on the Walk Bridge, and I have not shied away from the fact that we cannot continue to have a bridge that is from the 19th century. That is not the way this country and this region will grow. Every time that the Northeast region is closed down, and many times it's because of this bridge, it costs $100 million to the regional economy per day when that thing is closed. And granted, that bridge, when it gets replaced, it's an inconvenience, it's a hardship, it's difficult, and our job as state legislators is to try and best protect our constituents and ensure that we're helping to mitigate as much of the problem as possible. And I have personally spent hours upon hours upon hours upon hours working with various stakeholders in the area, whether it's the small businesses in the area, whether it's the Maritime Aquarium, whether it's the apartments across the street, or Spinnaker, or those, those folks. I have spent an inordinate amount of time ensuring that their voices are heard and that we are working hard to represent them at the table. But we cannot continue to have a 19th century transportation system in this country, especially this state, but in this country, and expect somehow our economy to grow. It's just not going to happen. And we can't tell people to say, you know what, why don't you get out of your cars and get on the trains, but then have a lousy train service. I mean, right now, it takes 10 more minutes to get to Grand Central from South Norwalk than it did 10 years ago. That's unacceptable. And the reason for that is because of the fact that infrastructure was not maintained and improved over the years. Well, guess what? We hit the brick wall. Now it's got to get done. So that's why it's taking longer to get it done. And longer to get people to New York. So it's going to change eventually, but we can't try to change all the rest of it and then leave this bridge that's basically almost Civil War era and say that that's good enough, because it's not. And neither is the 4-Point Street Bridge, neither is the Ant Street Bridge, neither is the Saugatuck River Bridge. None of those are acceptable. We've got to change those, and we've got to make the hard decisions to move our state and our nation forward, especially as it relates to transportation. So I will continue to be an advocate for those kind of transportation improvements, fixing infrastructure.
Sorry. I would encourage anyone, if you haven't been, I've been to several Walk Bridge meetings, but there is right on Water Street, there is a little, like almost a shop, where they go through and they talk about the different aspects of what the full repair is, why the proposal is what it is. And if you have questions, there's people there to answer them. They have open houses every so often. Really, I think it's a great idea. The website's also a really good wealth of information. So please, please educate yourselves.
Okay, we're going to wrap up. We'll hang around for a couple more minutes. You have some questions. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. We appreciate it. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions.
Oh, thanks. Pleasure. Happy birthday.